Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war Geopolitics live. And I thought I'd just do this last minute because I've got a spare few minutes. I don't know how long I've got to be able to do this, but I've got an awful lot to talk about. I went and picked up my partner from the hospital. Her daughter's staying in the hospital overnight. So brought her back, and we finished cracking into a bottle of Ukrainian white wine that we got from Lidl's. So trying to support Ukraine through drinking alcohol. Very drinkable, actually. It's not too overpowering. It's not too buttery. I like a buttery Chardonnay, but this Chardonnay is just really quaffable, actually. It's very drinkable. Anyway, I'll finish the last of it with you, my good team. Thank you very much to JR, who is in the background, fielding any questions and working out if there's anything that needs further discussion from the questions you guys may or may not have and comments and whatnot. There is an awful lot to go through because so much is going on at the moment. And if I didn't get this out, I mean, one of my boys is watching I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here with my partner. So that's why I've taken this time, but I don't know how much longer I've got. My other boy is playing a Fortnite tournament. So if you can hear some shouts of despair, he's just over there. So this is some time to talk to you. And my goodness, we've got Georgia going off. We've got Romania getting ready for some serious decisions. We've got Syria going off. We've got Ukraine, obviously. We've got Trump and the new administration coming in and all the chaos surrounding that, and what could be good news for Ukraine or could be bad news for Ukraine. We're still kind of in this limbo about Ukraine. And then all the stuff concerning Russia and China and Iran and North Korea and how all of these countries affect Europe, the UK, Australia, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Canada, and the US predominantly. But my goodness, you then have Africa and all these other areas of the world and topics that are all interrelated. And so when I started doing this channel, ATP Geopolitics, was mainly concentrating on the Ukraine war. And I had a couple of comments today, and I don't know whether they're just outright trolls, but saying this channel is supposed to be about the Ukraine war. I only came for, it's like, yes, it is predominantly about that, but not just. And actually, you can choose not to watch certain videos and just forward wind certain videos if you don't like the topic that we're talking about. And the reality of the situation, or the reality of the globe of life, is that everything is much more connected than, and I've realized this in the last 2.5 years of doing this, is that my goodness, everything is far more connected than I ever realized. And my goodness, there's a lot of politics that goes on under the hood that we are just not aware of, that is incredibly important. And if we don't get involved in finding out about these things, then we just think our money's just being frittered away doing whatever, these kind of moral or charity work around the world or police work around the world. And actually, it's a lot more nuanced than that, and so on and so forth. So anywho, I don't want to digress too much. Let's get stuck into what is going on around the world. And let's, what's the best? I think that's best, isn't it? We are going to start with Georgia. Okay, so first things first, there is at the moment, or there are at the moment, large protests going around. I believe not only in Tbilisi. I saw something from Anton Gerashchenko, actually, but he took it down, and it was intimating there were lots of protests going on in different cities, but then he's taken that down. So I don't know. I hope it's going on in different cities. This has been last night it was very, I guess, violent, or there was violence as the police cracked down on the protesters. But you can see it's a really vast crowd there in Tbilisi, and that is fairly recent. That's tonight, as far as I understand. In Tbilisi, protesters threw stones and fireworks at the parliament, sparking a fire. Protesters also burned an effigy of Bidzina Ivanishvili, founder of the ruling Georgian Dream Party. So if you remember, we've talked through him before. In fact, I've done a Vatnik soup on him from Pekka Kalyonemi, talking about this billionaire, I think he is, who he's no longer actually in politics, but is the founder of the Georgian Dream Party. He has this big kind of not palace, but like modern palace sitting on the hills above Tbilisi, and he's basically founded Georgian Dream. Georgian Dream had this remit of, or an agenda to get Georgia closer to the EU, to accede to the EU, and now they've been in power and they've been corrupted essentially, or compromised by Russia. They are now going against that, and they are now taking Georgia further towards Russia. And the latest elections were rigged, and now we've got these protests, and I'm hoping that they will go like the Euromaidan protests and be stalwart defenders of democracy that don't cave to the pressures of violent thugs in the police. But that's easy for me to say, sitting in my comfortable environs of my room on the south coast of the UK. Like, how would I feel to be on the receiving end of a baton, getting beaten around the head? And I've seen some pretty violent things. And so it's one thing for us to say, come on, Georgia, you can do that. But it's another thing to be that person on the front line taking a beating by the police. And so it takes an awful lot of courage, awful lot of political willpower. But I hope that they do, find their voice and find their political power and stand up for what is good and right in Georgia. Now, the United States, interestingly, has suspended its strategic partnership with Georgia after the decision of the Georgian Dream Party to suspend the process of the country's accession to the EU, which itself led to the EU suspending their kind of strategic partnership. So they have been, what you're seeing is Georgia being treated like a pariah state and being, I guess, repudiated by the rest of the world. And that could go either way. Like I've said to you before, the carrot or the stick. If you try and use a carrot and it's attracting behavior to a certain position, then that often has a better effect than using the stick. But actually, sometimes nations are just beyond the carrot, and you've just got to say, right, screw you. You go and sit over there on the naughty step until you've worked out what you've done. Hopefully, Georgia will be able to realize that going towards Russia, especially when Russia is in this political position of vulnerability, where its economy is tanking and it's not looking as powerful as it once was. You might have people who are sitting on the edge, sitting on the fence in Georgia, going, actually, really, we want to be going towards the EU, towards the US, towards the West, because going that way, it's not looking as attractive anymore. Anna Gvashvili here saying, I've been reporting from the ground for 10 years and I've never seen anything even as close to what I've witnessed today and yesterday. So this was written yesterday. This feels like a turning point in the Georgia protests. I've never seen the Georgian people so unyielding. Just last week, I wrote that smaller crowds in the streets compared to spring meant nothing, except that the anger hadn't gone anywhere. Instead, it was simmering, growing stronger, waiting for the regime's next mistake to erupt with even greater force. Today's riot was dispersed so many times in such brutal ways that I've lost count. So many people were bloodied, so many people detained. Yet even now, Rustaveli Avenue is filled with people beaten, bruised, exhausted, disappointed, and fiercely angry, but still holding EU flags with pride, because we believe that Europe is our home and we will not surrender at any cost. Help us. Don't let us lose this country to the Russians. No one has fought harder for it than we have. So you really strong words there, and gives you hope that there is this political willpower fueled by anger from these Georgian citizens. President Zurashvili, so she is not the Georgian Dream. So they have the prime minister and was it 84 of the parliament there, members of parliament who are Georgian Dream, the majority, but of course a rigged election. But the president Zurashvili is Salome Zurashvili, is staunchly pro-Western. She has walked to the special forces preparing to advance against the protesters. This was last night, and was talking to them. She asked them whether they had vowed to protect Georgia and Georgians or Russia, and demands that they think of the future of their children. So really powerful stuff there. And indeed, she then has said, my mandate remains in effect, because there is, I think, this move to get rid of her from the Georgian Dream and institute a replacement president. But she says, my mandate remains in effect until a legally elected parliament appoint someone to replace me. So she's arguing that you're not legally elected. It was a rigged election, so you can't get rid of me. I am with you, and I will stay with you. That's the Georgian people. Zura Spishvili's term is set to end in December 2024. So technically, she has only a month or so left. Now, an incredible bit of footage here of an old babushka going up, really bravely to these riot police and saying, quote, "I understand, but why don't you understand? You are now protecting the millions of those sitting at the top, their palaces. Where did they get so many palaces? Pools, palaces were built. Why are they the Georgian dream? Where did they come from? What kind of family did they grow up in?" So on and so forth. Really powerful stuff, and I love it when it reminds me of the beginning of the invasion into Ukraine, where you had people trying to give the Russian soldiers sunflower seeds, these old ladies and whatnot, and standing up to tanks and standing up to soldiers and stuff, such like. Really, really powerful. Now, it was looking a bit dicey last night. So Tim White was saying it seems for the moment police in Georgia realized they cannot get rid of the people from the streets of the capital, Tbilisi. This was recorded last night, just a few minutes ago, but that was last night. On Rustaveli Avenue in the center, where protesters have erected makeshift barricades again. So that's very reminiscent of the Euromaidan protests in Ukraine. Here, protesters defend their hastily erected makeshift barricades with fireworks. This afternoon, the police in Tbilisi removed all the garbage bins to avoid them being used for barricades, which happened the night before. But I won't show you this video. Oh, no, I won't show you that video, but she gets kicked in the face and head, and it's horrendous. Shocking scenes in Georgia this morning, so late last night, as police brutally beat anyone left on the streets from the night protests. They're also trying to block journalists and cameras from filming the sickening scenes in Tbilisi. So this is a worry that actually they did seem to break up, or the protests then dissipated last night. And what you want is this to continue in the way that Euromaidan did, the kind of non-stop element to that. Georgia's corrupt officials, says Tim White, claim 10 of their officers were injured, and they arrested over 100 protesters over the past 2 nights. No reliable numbers yet for injuries suffered by protesters. There is a long video of some of the other violent police actions on his Twitter feed. I mean, they've been pretty violent, the police, in responding to those protests last night. And as I mentioned, it's easy to make comments from here, but just imagine being on the receiving end of that. And Steve Rosenberg, who is usually in Moscow for the BBC, I was going to play you this, but I can't play it to you easily. When I do these lives, I have to put it on a different thing and whatever. I was going to play you his little minute here of reporting from outside the Georgian parliament, all sorts of stuff going on there. Interesting little snippet from Steve Rosenberg. Next, the reports tonight, actually this afternoon, this afternoon my time, so this will be later in Georgia, probably 7 o'clock in Georgia. People in Tbilisi have gathered again for a protest, this time near the Georgian Public Broadcasters building. Protesters are demanding the state channel publicly condemn police violence against demonstrators and journalists. The protests in Tbilisi are ongoing, fueled by the suspension of the EU integration and allegations of election fraud. On the night of November the 30th, police dispersed a rally near the Parliament building, detaining, I presume, another 107 people. Now, that Parliament building, they apparently, here it is. I think they set fire to the Parliament building. Updates from Georgian. Despite the awful scenes, it's clear the fight continues against Russia's influence, against the Russian-influenced self-appointed government. Fight for freedom never ends. Journalists have been deliberately targeted in the Georgia protests. It's a typical Russian tactic. 2 of the injured local reporters managed to be released from hospital today, but one, you can see there. I mean, that's pretty a stark reminder of what it takes to fight for freedom against, brutal regimes. Georgia's ambassador to the Netherlands has quit in disgust in the wake. So we saw the ambassador to... was it Bulgaria quit, I think. And now we've got the Georgian ambassador to the Netherlands quitting as well over the stolen election. David Solomonia cited the anti-European policies of the Georgian Dream Party, which sparked renewed protests. So Yeah, then we've got Michael Clark here saying a number of different reports are coming in from all directions in Georgia. Situation may be moving pretty quickly. Protest in Rustavi, same happens in Kashuri, Batumi, Kutaisi, Akhmeta, and in many other cities I can't count. So that's what you want, is you want it not just to be in Tbilisi, and you want Georgian Dream government to realize it's much bigger and more and less controllable than they would like. But on the other hand, you've got the prime minister here of Georgian Dream Party, Kobakidze, saying there will be no Ukrainian Maidan revolution scenario in Georgia after the violent crackdown on protests. He blamed opposition parties and foreign partners for the clashes during the demonstrations. Quote, they have not realized yet, unlike Ukraine in 2013, Georgia is an independent state with strong institutions and, most importantly, experienced and wise people whose power no one can shake. Yeah, I mean, yeah, whatever. We shall see, I guess. Now, this is someone, Alexander X, I don't really know, says, I say to Georgia, there is no sense in waiting for the West to support you. Ukraine already gives you the greatest chance to seize your freedom. We occupy the entire Russian army. Take it. It is the only chance you will have. This is really interesting because this is quite similar to Syria. So you got, the idea is that both, for all of these, Georgia, Syria, and Ukraine, because Russia is split over those countries, and also you can argue the Sahel region in Africa and elsewhere, they are very distracted. And now is the time. There will never be a better time for Georgia to seize, the Georgians to seize power against an autocratic, undemocratic regime for the people. In you know, none of us believe that that was a democratically elected government, right? It was rigged, that election. So for the people to correctly seize power, they need to rise up now, and they will never have a better chance. As this person says, take it. It's the only chance you'll have. There will be no Russian troops, no little green men sent to support your corrupt leaders. How can the Georgian people win their freedom? Ukrainians during Maidan made body armor and makeshift weapons and brought in trucks and bulldozers to fight the forces of the oppressor. Without a Russian army to interfere, Georgians outnumber their oppressors thousands to one. Thousands to one. Victory is already yours. You have to reach out, one united nation, and take it. Syria is taking advantage of our occupying the entire Russian army. Georgia should do the same. Take your freedom. We give our lives to occupy the enemy. I do not believe that peaceful demonstrations can ever work against a Russian-backed government. They will only respond with force and more force. This is because they only understand force. It's either go out all out fighting the enemy or go down beaten and bloody, then to be arrested and beaten some more. The enemy are not ethical or humane. Even worse, when you are arrested, you get added to their database of enemies. Your face is known. Interesting. I mean, that's very pugilistic rhetoric. So it's very bellicose rhetoric, to use some very big words there. I've talked about this before. It was Martin Luther King that basically, I think, advocated this idea that that actually, you know, peaceful protests, they can work, but there is a place for, you know, unfortunately, peaceful protests can also be rather easily ignored. And it's only until you get a bit funky that that you start having more effectively. So that's Georgia for you. Just coming back into look at the live chat, see if there's anything worthy of note from you guys. And thanks again to JR, who is helping out in the background. Right. Okay. I like this. Tremor says, lol, lying in bed, procrastinating, going to the gym. Then JP's stream starts. Looks like I'm not going. I don't want to make you unhealthy, guys. I don't. But so be it. Michael Vuchat, thank you, gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics membership. What a legend. Thank you, Michael, for your continued comments and input into the channel. The Weasel with a super sticker, thank you very much as well. We have Marino 4691 saying, is there no Georgian YouTuber covering the protest, maybe live for an interview or something? It's a really good point. If anyone knows of anyone, that would be a really interesting live chat, wouldn't it? So yeah, if any of you guys can put me in touch with anyone, and that goes across the board. I know some people have been getting in contact saying, can you interview the witch? I'm so busy that it's that it's difficult to find time to organize these things. So if anyone can help out with that, I'm always up for talking to people. You know that. Mark Bisque, the legend that is Mark and Olena. Congratulations on the new addition to the family. Yep. So we have little Leonie. She spent time in France, Helen's daughter, and so she's given her little daughter French name Leonie. Congratulations on the new addition to the family. Your next bottle of Ukrainian wine is on us. Oh, thanks, mate. And I do need to get back to Lidl to get some more Ukrainian wine. I'm quite excited about that. Thanks, Mark. You and Olena are just amazing. It almost brings tears to my eyes. Georgia can only have a chance if Turkey fully supports them to break away from Russian control. Interesting, Aussie bugger. I'd like to look at your rationale for that. So please flesh out a little bit. So what is Turkey's influence with Georgia? And I guess, obviously they're neighboring countries, very close geographically. Turkey's involved in Syria, which is also close. And yeah, Turkey is just incredibly important. I've talked previously about how Turkey is the crossroads of the world, really. It's, Turkey is where north meets the south and east meets the west, where Christianity and secularism meets Islam, where it's all around Turkey, where the Bosphorus Straits are controlled through the Montreux Convention to the Black Sea. So Turkey are massively important. They're in NATO, but they're kind of messing around with BRICS. They want to be a part of the EU, but they don't really. They want to be part of BRICS, but do they really? And they're just kind of playing everyone because they're at the center, and Erdogan knows that, and he's using that to his advantage. And that's not a criticism. That is a wily political player. He's the statecraft that's involved in being in charge of somewhere like Turkey, quite insane. And we I think underestimate the importance of Turkey in the world. We get annoyed with them for justified reasons, but Erdogan is just playing his hand as well as he thinks he can. Yes, so Michael Vucher, I want you to interview Dylan Burns on Syria. Absolutely, if you can sort that out, if you can help with that, I'll be well up for that. I'm not too sure of Dylan Burns. Have I seen Dylan Burns before? I'm sure I have. People have mentioned him. I know that name. But yeah, I'm up for that. Aussie Bugger then says, in answer to what I said, Turkey has a border. Yeah, no other method to supply Georgia. Russia can cut the road from Tbilisi to the coast, South Ossetia, a few kilometers from the road. So what we need to do, actually, Aussie Bugger, not we, I need to go and get some mapping done not mapping done. I need to look at a map of Georgia, and we'll have a little think about Georgia and look at it from a geopolitical point of view, from a geographical point of view. Right, now, let's go back to the topics at hand. We are going to go to Syria now. Just a short update. It's all happening in Syria, as we have seen previously. Let's look at this map again, because this has been a useful map, and it keeps changing, actually. So let's copy that and remind ourselves, because I know I've mentioned Syria a number of times in most of my videos today. We have this situation where, and I hope that is being seen. Yes, it is. Good. So we've got a situation where Aleppo was taken over by this, the people represented by this white patch. There are so many different rebel groupings here. They're also pushing south to Hama, and there were these claims that the SAA, the Assad regime troops, were pulling out of Hama and back down to Homs, and they were going to take over Hama. Well, now it looks like that actually the Assad regime are throwing reinforcements into Hama, and they're going to have a bit of a fight over that. So, preliminary Syria update. War Mapper says Syrian rebels have launched a rapid offensive in the northwest of the country, capturing Aleppo, the country's second largest city. Rebel forces have also advanced southward, reaching the outskirts of Hama, and that is down here. That Aleppo's up here. They've basically taken Aleppo. You've got other forces, other different rebel forces coming into play up here. Then there was this, I talked about this in the last video. There's been this agreement supposedly between all the different rebel groupings around Syria that they're not going to fight each other, which is, you've got to remember that the Turks are in support of certain rebel groups here, but the Turks hate the Kurds and think the Kurdish, the YPG, and others are terrorist organizations, and the Kurds are broadly in this kind of yellow area, as far as I understand it, supported by the Americans. So the Turkish here are supporting some groups, and remember that's against the Assad regime that is supported by Iran and Russia, which means Turkey is against Russia. So you've got potentially Turkish S-300, S-400 air defense systems firing at Russian fighter jets, and elsewhere, Turkey is trying to attract Russian investment into Turkey and has not sanctioned Russia in the same way that other countries have. So it's such a messy situation. But anyway, the idea has been that the rebels were going to take Hama, but actually it's not looking like that's necessarily happening at the moment. So anyway, Russians are reportedly withdrawing their troops from all the bases in the provinces of Aleppo, Hama, and Deir ez-Zor. So that is, pulling out of a number of different places here. The Russians, that is. Interesting. And then we have claims from the Russians that, of course, these very quick gains from the rebels are the fault of the Ukrainians. Everything points to them. Who's behind the escalation in Syria, says RA Novosti. Ukrainian commanders spotted among Syrian militants attacking Aleppo. Now, we do know that Ukrainians have been there. They've targeted an airbase previously, taking out some electronic warfare equipment in that airbase in strikes there. But this is probably overblowing the Ukrainian influence by orders of magnitude. Now, interesting here, David D says, if the Russians lose Syria, then they can't fly their AN-12s to Africa anymore. It's too far. So remember that Syria is super important, not just for having Tartus, which is this port on the Mediterranean Sea, this warm water port that the Russians can use in order to access the Mediterranean. And by accessing the Mediterranean, they can then get out into the Atlantic. It's just super important. Anyway, that's important. But also, it appears that they use Syria as a waypoint in getting to Africa, so that those larger cargo planes can refuel and get to Africa. You lose that ability, and Russia starts losing influence in Africa potentially. So that's interesting. If it is indeed true. And then we hear just now that the commander of all the Russian troops in Syria, Lieutenant General Sergei Kisel, has been relieved of his duties. And 2 years ago, he already experienced that fate when he got fired from the Western Military District after a string of failures in Ukraine. So he got shunted off from Ukraine for failures to Syria, and has now been relieved of his command in Syria. So there you go. That's what's going on in Syria. I guess the main thing is that the Syrian Assad regime are piling in reinforcements into Hama, and they are going to be fighting over that rather than capitulating, as was earlier thoughts. Right, we're now going to go on to other geopolitical topics, and we're going to start with Ivana Stradner, the Balkans expert, saying that British spies are taking covert action against Russia to help defeat Vladimir Putin in his effort to take Ukraine, the head of MI6 has said. There's been these really interesting things happening concerning the MI6, our kind of military intelligence, whereby I think it's a former head of MI6 is now going to be the pick for the ambassador to the US to be that conduit between the UK and the US. So I think that's a really clever appointment by Keir Starmer there, where you've got someone that's got an intimate knowledge of the covert operations of Russia and the influence operations of Russia, being our point man in the US. So that's a very good appointment. But we've also got MI6 talking about how our spies are taking covert action against Russia. Things are really heating up. I told you that I've said this for a year now, that we're in World War III. Most of us don't realize it. The average Joe out there is happy to go about their lives, just blissfully ignorant of the world of geopolitics. But as far as I'm concerned, we're in World War III, and it's becoming more and more apparent with each passing day, to the point where lots of people are pretty much intimating the same thing. Some people are saying we are, some people are saying we're on a precipice, and essentially it's a bit of a a bit of a rhetorical, semantic game to some degree, but I for all intents and purposes, I think we are, and it's super serious. Now, Cyprus has revoked the citizenship of 86 people, 77 of them Russians. This is interesting because Cyprus are one of these, a bit like Turkey. In fact, Cyprus, half of it is kind of has Turkish influence, half of it Greek influence. Or then, anyway, without getting into long weeds of that, they have long been a source, a place where the Russians can launder their money, where there's a lot of Russian investment, where you've got cargo, shipping with Russian ties, etc., etc. So I think it's pretty important that 86 people have had their citizenship revoked, and most of them being Russians. The names include Russian billionaire Oleg Deripaska. So if you remember Paul Manafort, the previous Trump campaign in 2016 with Paul Manafort, who was then done for his dodgy dealings with Russia and then was pardoned by Trump. Well, anyway, that's Oleg Deripaska. He's had his Cypriot citizenship revoked. Former top manager of Lukoil, Ali Beglov, Alpha Group shareholder, Kuzmichev, founder of the main shareholder of Safmar Group, Gutsiriev, so on and so forth. All these big players have had their citizenship revoked. So interesting move there from Cyprus. Now, good poll coming out from the EU here. Nearly 87% of Europeans back providing humanitarian aid to war victims, while 71% approve of sanctions on Russian authorities, companies, and individuals. Financial aid to Ukraine is supported by 68% of respondents, and 60% favor granting Ukraine EU candidate status. That's pretty good. Additionally, 58% agree with financing military supplies. So that's across Europe. That's still the majority. So I'm pretty happy with that. Good results coming out there. Now we're going to go on to Romania, and we're going to look a little bit into the Călin Georgescu chap who is going to be running for the president of Romania. He won that first round of the presidential elections. So in order to make it clear to everyone how bad things are about to get for all of us, if the pro-Russian Călin Georgescu takes control of Romania, EU's 7th largest country and a vital NATO member. I've translated just enough of his statements for you to get a taste. This is Derek Tanis, a good source on things to do with Romania. So, about water, quote, these are all from this guy. We do not know what water is. H2O does not mean anything. Every vaccine is a software designed to modify the spiritual structure of humans, and water is the antidote. Water from the Carpathian Springs can heal any disease. Water is alive. About vaccines. Vaccines block the cosmic spiritual vibrations of our DNA. Vaccines are designed to erase all traces of the spiritual and energetic codes of humanity. Every prayer originating in Romania recharges the cosmic energies of the human DNA. Ugh. About Romania. Romania is the keeper of an ancient cosmic secret of humanity. Romania is an energetic center of planet Earth. Romania will become the global leader of the future worldwide spiritual revolution. Romania is destined to lead humanity. Okay. About religion. Jesus was resurrected in order for Romania to become the lighthouse of humanity. Our Carpathian Mountains are the pillars that keep the energetic balance of the universe. Prayers originating from Romania feed universal energies of lightness. Oh my goodness. I need to get on my other YouTube channel, A Tippling Philosopher, and just take this man to town. About neutrality. Our neutrality is not a choice. It's a cosmic obligation. He likes the cosmic stuff. There is a cosmic call for our neutrality. Who made that cosmic call? Designed to protect our spiritual energy. Romania's neutrality is written in the stars. What does that mean, you numbnut? And is the key to a balanced future for humanity. Go away, you fool. About traditions. Romanian villages and traditions keep the spiritual balance of the entirety of Europe. Romanians will be reborn by returning to their villages. Every Romanian tradition is a well of divine cosmic light and energy. Interesting thing here, right? Because he appears to be some guy that's got some weird kind of woo beliefs that you might associate with the kind of far left. But he's kind of the horseshoe theory. He's kind of swiveled round to the far right, and he's going down that kind of ultra nationalist but in line with what Russia wants type thinking. And it's interesting he's talking about going back to the villages. If you read Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, he talks about 10 pillars of how you get to fascism. One of them is about the bucolic heartlands, that there is this kind of sense of environmentalism, or not, more like just traditions of the countryside that you saw in Germany in the 1930s, like appealing to the traditions, you know, working hard and the bucolic heartlands, and returning to the villages here, and the urban centers where you get like immigration and you get the decadence of integration and the normalization of deviant behavior and all this kind of stuff. It's these urban areas that are problematic, and the rural areas, they represent the true traditions of the country, so on and so forth. And so actually that kind of thinking does fit in with the larger understanding of a kind of potentially an ultra nationalism. About forests, planet Earth's spirit hides within Romanian forests. Every Romanian forest is more than a forest. It's a pillar that sustains the energetic purity, interesting, purity, tradition. These are actually, so what you might think of these elements of the far left, but again, horseshoe, they're elements. When you talk about purity, if you look at Jonathan Haidt and his different sort of indicators of political, psychological ideology, purity and tradition are generally things that are much more valued by the right than the left. The left are like, don't care about stuff like that so much. It's about progressivism and changing and screw you authority and that kind of stuff. Whereas the right would be much more aligned to ideas of tradition and purity, which is kind of what he's talking about here. So this kind of fits. Energetic purity of the universe. Every Romanian tree is a channel and catalyst of the cosmic divine energy. About technology, about we can do the rest actually. About technology, we must fight against technology in order to keep our divine essence. So again, this is going back to tradition. This is almost a Luddite approach. The internet was designed to capture and trap our souls. Digitalization will bring about an era of energetic slavery. Last but not least, the Romanian Carpathians are the key to finding and understanding new dimensions. The rebirth of humanity will start in our Carpathians. Update: a lot of my fellow Romanians have pointed out in the comments I've only begun to scratch the surface here. Among the many things I've left out is meeting with non-human species, soda microchips, and some very sound arguments as to why the moon landing is fake. So he's the guy that came first in the presidential first round of the presidential election or process. I only hope that most people voted for him because they didn't really know what he was about, and he was popular on TikTok, and it was all to do with being anti-establishment. And I hope there will be this realization before, I think, December the 8th, when the second round takes place, whereby they go, oh no, he's an absolute wingnut, he needs to jog on. And Derek Taylor says elsewhere, because two can play at this game, a massive number of Romanians have began to actively join TikTok and push back against Georgescu's propaganda machinery. Perhaps the funniest of these campaigns, one that might actually have an impact in tomorrow's parliamentary elections, is what tomorrow? It's not December the 1st. Parliamentary elections. Oh, they might have parliamentary elections. Interesting. Is the one that managed to convince a surprisingly high number of Georgescu supporters, which are violently anti-LGBT, to ironically vote for a little-known reformist and pro-LGBTQ party, tricking them into thinking that the acronym of the actual party Georgescu supports stands for something akin to the Party of Transsexual People. Anyway, the point of me including this is there are those in Romania who are harnessing TikTok to kind of mess things up in the way that TikTok was harnessed by Georgescu to mess things up. Anyway, we're going to go from Romania now to Hungary. So Viktor Orban's kleptocracy. So kleptocracy is corruption, stealing, kleptomania, stealing. So Viktor Orban's kleptocracy is next to the chopping block as all Putin's puppets implode globally, says Jay in Kiev. And this is in response to the crisis of Orbanomics. In other words, Orban's economic policies is evident not only in a lack of GDP growth. So Hungary is one of the worst performing economies in Europe, in the EU, but also in the sharp decline of the Hungarian forint. Sorry, that's their currency, which has lost nearly 10% of its value against the euro in just a year. Disillusionment with Orban's government is primarily driven by the failing economy. And this is kind of as it ever is. Okay, if you are an incumbent government, you're doing well with the economy, you will get voted back in. I think what's interesting with the Trump election win is that he was able to convince people that the Biden economy was rubbish, when in fact, against all the metrics and then comparatively against the G7, the economy's done really, really well. It's just people still remember inflation from post-COVID, post energy crisis times when it was bad, but that was a global thing. It wasn't a US economy thing, but actually they coped with that really well. Anyway, point being that people's perceptions overrode reality there. But normally the economy dictates how well you do. So if the economy is really tanking in Hungary, then that gives more grist to the mill, more ammunition for opposition parties to do well, and might put the writing on the wall for Orban and his Fidesz party. However, like with Georgian Dream, there's always the ability to rig the elections. Now, as Bloomberg reports, Hungary's credit outlook, though, has been cut to negative by Moody's credit ratings. Moody's kept Baa2 rating for Hungary, second lowest above junk. Weaker governance risks losing out on EU funds, Moody's says. So if they're weak in their governance, then they won't get as much funding from the EU, which means it's all going in the wrong direction, and that might lead Fidesz to be punished by the electorate. But again, rig the elections. Right, Poland has installed 3,500 concrete hedgehogs on the border with Russia, and the Eastern Shield defense line will also be built on the border with Ukraine, says the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk. We've seen this in the Baltic nations, also building like minefields and their own dragon's teeth and whatnot. It's, as I say, we are involved in World War III. You've got minefields and tank defenses being built within Europe, within the EU. Things are piling up for Putin's despotic regime, though, as Russian embassy in Cuba is now warning that their colony is now out of jet fuel, with all resources going to genocide in Ukraine, says Jay in Kiev. Putin is losing Syria, Georgia, Cuba. What's next? So Russian embassy in Cuba reports, in connection with the notification of the Cuban authorities about the shortage of aviation fuel at the airports of Havana and Varadero, from December the 1st to 8th, we call on Russian tourists already on the island to remain in constant contact with the tour operator, because you might not be getting home, my friends. You might be stuck there. So, yeah, things are looking a bit dodgy around the place. And then Russia is just losing out. I mean, I go back to what I often say, which is that Putin's decision to invade Ukraine is one of the worst decisions made in modern history. Okay? And not only have they become this pariah state, but actually they're losing out in so many different ways. Science, working cooperatively on like the space stations and science and this and that. Here we have CERN ends cooperation with Russian institutes. So the European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN, has officially cut ties with research institutes in Russia following a decision to allow the cooperation agreement to expire in light of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Again, Russia lose out. Explosive revelations in the Canadian Parliament. Former Minister Chris Alexander presents alleged KGB files showing decades-long Soviet intelligence operation to spread anti-Ukrainian narratives through Canadian media. So Euromaidan Press reports this. Now, Mark Bisque and Olena, who we've just heard from, and thank you for your support, Mark and Olena, but they are Ukrainians living in Canada. They will know this firsthand. I would imagine. Who spreads Ukrainian Nazi stories in Canada? KGB's Agent Stewart files tell all. So I won't go through this now because it's another big Euromaidan article. So they come in two forms, Euromaidan articles, very short or very long. And the long ones are good investigative bits of journalism. And here we have a look into the disinformation work taking place in Canada to skew the narrative anti-Ukrainian there. Be interested if any Canadians, Michael Vuchar, you are a Canadian Ukrainian. I wonder what your thoughts on that would be, but you might need to read the article first. Okay, moving on. Anton Gerashenko talks about the Kremlin press service starting to remove metadata from videos and photos featuring Putin to make it impossible to find out the exact time and date they were made. Now, this is very... I find this fascinating. we have so often seen these claims that Putin hasn't been seen in public for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever. And then suddenly you'll see a video of him speaking to Shoigu or something like that, and you're thinking, did that happen yesterday? Was that? And you look around, there's alcohol hand rub on there, and you're thinking that's probably from more around the COVID times. And some of those phones look a little bit older, and you're thinking, I reckon you've just got an old bit of video footage and you're just trying to recycle it to make it look like he is out and about, and rather be stuck as bunker boy, and so on and so forth. Well, now they're stripping metadata from video, so you can't tell when these videos were taken. All files that are published on the Kremlin's website have zeros instead of this information, meaning that the file's properties were edited. Curiously, metadata was even redacted in a video of Putin's special address, in which he talked about using the Oreshnik missile to strike Ukraine, as well as in a video of his press scrum at the CSTO meeting in Kazakhstan. Prior to this, data contained in the file's properties showed that videos and photos passed off as new were actually pre-made. The presidential administration often uses canned footage from Putin's meetings to show the continuity of his work, especially during periods when he disappears from the public eye for long periods of time. This then feeds into the theory that he's not very well and he goes away for some time to get treatment or whatever, or he's not well. He had that video recently where he didn't move his hands for 7.5 minutes, and it was all weird because he's moving up here and his hands were completely stationary. And people are saying, well, that's a bit weird. Is there the CGI going on there, or what's happening? That often he's holding tables with his hands because there are theories he's got hand tremors due to having Parkinson's. There's also theories he's got some kind of cancer, some kind of abdominal cancer, I think is one of the main theories, and that he got treatment in Israel for. And that's why there's this relation, or there was this relationship between Russia and Israel, so on and so forth. So all these theories flying around, and actually some of the dots can be joined up quite successfully, I think. I've written articles on how I think he is ill, but you know, when you're the richest man in the world, arguably, or I don't know if Musk has overtaken him now. No one knows how much Putin actually has, but you can afford the very best treatment, right? Now, talking about Putin, his daughter has been living illegitimately under a pseudonym in Paris, where she's been working as a DJ, according to Ukrainian media. So Telegraph reporting that. Yeah, how does that happen? Lots of people go, what is going on there? How can people so easily get around sanctions, etc., etc.? And then finally, on this main geopolitical segment, we've got Chinese companies have frozen sales on Russian marketplaces due to the sharp fall of the ruble. After the dollar exchange rate crossed the 100 ruble mark in November, exporters complained that the ruble's depreciation makes goods too expensive for Russians, and currency fluctuations are eating into their profits. All is not looking well for the Russian economy. Right, let's bring back you guys into the conversation. You've heard enough of me just wittering on endlessly. Let's see what you guys have to say. We have Stephen Bendal. I must talk to you, Stephen. We must have another chat about your experiences in Ukraine recently. As I said in the interview, so I have interviewed him previously, and thank you for your kind Norwegian love. Russia has lost the war. Surprise is on the horizon. It will end well for Ukraine. That is when I'm feeling my happiest, maybe after a glass of wine. Thanks, Ukraine. When I feel my happiest or my most optimistic, yes, I think Russia. I've said since the beginning of this war that Russia can't win this war. So the question is, can Ukraine win? And it's been looking more and more likely that neither side. This war will have damaged both sides hugely. It will have damaged Russia more, but I think it's looking more and more likely because, as we're going to go on to talk about in a second, Zelensky is now saying, well, look, if we can join NATO, then we'll forego those territories that the Russians have taken, only temporarily. We'll get them back, but it's kind of this punt to a future kind of, send around the bailiffs and get that territory back, which I don't know how realistic that would be. But we're hearing Zelensky be more and more kind of realistic, if you like. And this then leads me to believe that, yeah, I think it will end badly. Russia have lost the war. I don't deny that. So I think Russia have lost the war. They can't win the war because they're just not able to succeed in their maximalist original objectives. It's just a physical impossibility. They are not going to take control of the entirety of Ukraine. They're not going to have their puppet government in control in the Verkhovna Rada. That's not going to happen. So the question is, from a massive Ukrainian success to a massive Russian success, okay, we're going to cut it off to here. So how successful can the Ukrainians be? And will it be somewhere in the middle where both are screwed to some degree? Or how much success can Ukraine get? And we need to support Ukraine so that they are moving more and more to their end of the success spectrum. And I don't know. So when I'm my most optimistic, I think, yeah, actually, so Trump might end up supporting them, and Europe will ramp up support, and it will be down here. But can I see them getting back to Donbass? Can I see 1991 borders? I don't know. I don't know. I'm up and down. Sometimes I think, yeah, it can happen. And other days I'm like, nah, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen now. But I don't know. But then it's like, okay, they don't get it immediately. So Zelensky is saying, like, if we get NATO, then at least we're not going to lose any more because we'll be protected by Article 5. And then we can try and get back going forward. So if sanctions maintain on Russia, but then Russia won't sign up to Ukraine being in NATO and having sanctions. So it's like, what's the most realistic outcome that we can see? I don't know. Let me know in the comments right now. Right. Thank you, Stephen. Tim Vermorgan, to the Spank Johnny's Liver Fund. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tim. I try not to take advantage of my liver, but certain days, hey, we've got new life in the family. So, happy days. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate that. Tanya Rindenko, I've not heard from you for ages, Tanya. Thank you for dropping by with your Canadian love. Gifted 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Really appreciate that. Now, Benny Pie, who has been helping out heaps with YouTube and AI and stuff and all the shorts. I need to speak to you about shorts. There are loads of YouTube shorts now coming out from the channel. Some of you are like loving that. Some of you have been like, but I've seen these parts from other videos. Why are you repeating yourself? They are all, apart from very rarely where I'll do like a separate short because some weird sub 1 minute things I can talk about, but they're generally all excerpts from videos that have been made that AI has kind of picked out, and then Benny's looked at them and said, yeah, these are good, and the transcriptions are broadly working. And he's done such an amazing job with that, and it just adds to they don't come up in the main feed now that YouTube has sorted that out, so it shouldn't get in the way of, if you just like my long form videos, just watch the long form videos, don't worry about the shorts. But they're a way of getting people to find out about the channel by coming across shorts, because they're kind of like a little bit different, but they are broadly just excerpts from there's one recently, and there were several about Doris, poor old Doris. Thank you, by the way. Hashtag I loved someone's like hashtag save Doris. Like, she does get a beating. I do feel sorry for her, but that's her lot in life. Benny Pie, anyway. Turkey needs Georgia as a trade route. The Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway is a key east-west trade route. Thank you for this. Important for China too. It's the only east-west railway that doesn't go through Russia or Iran. Interesting. So this is where we find out more about things like railways and hydrocarbons, gas pipelines, so on and so forth. So there are lots of elements of why Russia might be interested in Syria, and it won't just be about Tartus, that warm water port. There'll be other reasons as well. Right. Orion's Starfire says, and thank you for your super chat there. We're back where we were 100 years ago, World War and economics. It's unfortunate that the world didn't get better. I'm grateful people like you are keeping on up with the current chaos. Cheers, brother. Have a beer. Thank you very much, Orion Starfire. And yeah, do you know what? I wonder whether it is to do with collective memories, and we seem to be now going through this. I don't know. Is life just cyclical? So many elements of life are cyclical. The rotation of the planet, the orbit of the planet, the rotation of the planet, each our seasons and everything seems to be cyclical, and that seems to include like history repeating itself. And I'm not trying to be all spiritual and everything, just like, things seem to go in cycles. And we when we start forgetting things and we forget how bad things are, then you can be attracted by the glinting treasure of some kind of simplistic solution to a global problem. And I think that significant enough people, well, most people who experienced World War II directly as an adult are now dying, and I think we've got to a point where people have forgotten what Nazi Germany did and what it was like, and we're now starting to re-embrace fascism and ultranationalism in many parts of the world, and that I think could be connected to our just lack of living memory of what was experienced. So I don't know. Let me know what you think. Right, give me 2 ticks. I've just got to tell my son to shut his door over there because he's just being a little bit noisy. And you didn't notice any of me telling my son to be quiet. That's great parenting there, isn't it? Mate, can you be quiet? Stop enjoying yourself. Aussie Bugger says, I wonder what prompted Cyprus to take action. They were gaining from Russian exports and money. Yes. Sorry, I haven't showed you that. So what I think is happening is that secondary sanctions are really biting. And this is the importance of both the US Treasury and the EU, is that sanctions work. There was a lot of talk about how sanctions, there are too many loopholes and they weren't working. Yes, it's a constant fight. It's this cat and mouse game of like sanction, loophole, close the loophole, find another loophole, close the loophole, etc., etc. And then sanctioning more stuff. And then, okay, ghost fleets, how do we deal with them? And so on and so forth. But they work. They might not have worked as well and as quickly as people had liked, but actually, I think our expectations, just like I've talked about previously with how immediate our gratification appears to we need instant gratification, basically. The internet isn't working for 10 seconds, we lose the plot. And if we haven't had our Amazon delivery by like 2 o'clock the next day, then we get angry. And if sanctions haven't worked by next Tuesday, then we're like, oh, woe is us, sanctions are rubbish. But actually, it just took 2.5 years, because these things are freaking complicated, for sanctions to really start biting with Russia. And my goodness, they're biting. And, when you've got a nation that's got the hydrocarbons that it has and the national reserves that it has, then you can sustain sanctions for longer than you might think. But it's got to the point where now the ruble is tanking. Now the Russian economy seems to be in a lot of trouble, where we're going, no, the sanctions are really bloody useful. And then the US Treasury has done secondary sanctions, which is going to other banks around the world, like Chinese banks and Indian banks, and saying, look, if you're going to deal with these guys over there, we're going to screw you over. And because we're the US, we're pretty freaking important. And that hurts. So then these banks go, okay, we've got 2 choices. Yeah, let's go for, like, who is more important to us, Russia or the US, the dollar or the ruble? US dollar and the US. So actually, we are not going to keep servicing this Russian entity or whatever. And that means China ends up causing Russia an issue. India ends up causing Russia an issue. Cyprus ends up causing us a Russia an issue. I mean, this is just my speculation. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I would imagine that the EU, both the EU and the US, have put insane amounts of pressure on Cyprus to get their act together, because everyone knows that Cyprus, and to some extent Greece, in terms of their cargo and their shipping, have been enabling Russia to continue to make money during this war. And this is why I'm particularly worried about a Trump administration lifting sanctions. And it's a bit, there are arguments going both ways on that at the moment. Richard Bennett, thank you. Such a legend and a great supporter of the channel with his 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Right, just before we get onto the US, a couple more comments. DSA, anyway, you, where? Thank you. ATP Geopolitics, he is a Mason and he is into New Age bullshit. Okay, so this is, I presume, with reference to Georgescu. His wife said that women shouldn't wear pants, as in trousers for English people, because women get any. Sorry, I just had visuals of energy going up skirts from the earth. Like, what? Women shouldn't wear trousers because women get energy from below from the planet. Oh man, some people are nuts. Thanks for that insight. That's really useful. Benny Pie, to be fair to Romanians, most didn't vote for him. Yeah, so this is actually true. He didn't get a huge vote. It was 22 point whatever percent, because you had the first round, you have loads of people, right? I personally think he's not got a cat's chance in hell in getting in the second round, but I don't know. Because I think that most people are going to realize now that he's a bit of a wingnut, and they'll find out about him more, and he's not just an anti-establishment person. But yeah, because there were so many people in that first round, then I presume you're cutting everyone out till the top two, or maybe the top three. I think it's just the top two though, run against each other. Then I presume he's got far less chance of getting through. But people are still worried, and they should be worried. Action needs to be taken. So most didn't vote for him. He only got a small proportion of the vote, but it was a bigger proportion than all the other candidates. Yes. It's whether he's got like a hard ceiling. Thanks, Benny. And Benny knows a bit about that neck of the woods. He's traveled to Moldova and that neck of the woods in Romania, I think. So he's well traveled there. Johnny Nedregard, with some Norwegian love there. Hello, community. Hello, Johnny. Appreciate you. And a few more. Orion Starfire, 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you, my man. And Kobe Jack as well with some ATP Geopolitics memberships. Really appreciate that too. Right, let's just get onto US stuff, and then I'll continue these. Actually, let's Aussie Bugger, ATP Geopolitics, have a gander at Professor Tim Wilson's YouTube. He has met Putin, has lived and worked in Russia. A collab between he and you would be interesting. Again, absolutely up for that. I'll have to look into that. If anyone can help me do that, then that'd be cool. Right, let's get back to where I was, which was looking at we finished doing the main rounds of the geopolitical stuff. We're going to go on to the US political scene as it affects Ukraine and the world. Now, I can't play you this, but basically, I mean, I could, but it just take me a minute to sort out. But Zelensky was offered to come on to chat with Joe Rogan. This is Joe Rogan, I think, context. Joe Rogan recently said, F you, Zelensky, or F Zelensky, F blah, blah, blah. And he was really derogatory about Ukraine. And this appears to be a case of parroting Russian narrative, not knowing enough about Ukraine, and going down the kind of MAGA Republican, Donald Trump Jr., Tucker Carlson kind of route. He seems to be properly, if you look at the rhetoric of Joe Rogan since the election win, and this is someone who's previously endorsed Bernie Sanders. So he's got that kind of populist side to him, but he's gone full on MAGA Trump recently. And now he's like fully in there. Now, loads of people then came out and said, hang on, you can't say that about Ukraine. This is parroting Russian propaganda. You don't know enough about, I think, the situation. How about you talk to? So you had Vladimir Klitschko, the heavyweight champion that is brother of Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, came out and said, hey, mate, all due respect, we need to have a conversation. I can put you straight on some of these things. Let's have a chat. You had Dmytro Kuleba, the former foreign minister. You had Jake Bro. You had all these people coming out saying, look, I'll come and speak to you on your podcast. Let's do this thing. And then obviously Zelensky offered to go on it. Now, Pekka Kaliemi here says Zelensky offered to come and have a chat with Joe Rogan about the war in Ukraine, but Joe Rogan refused. He'd rather get the story from his extremely biased pro-Kremlin friends like RFK Jr. and Elon Musk. And some still consider this man neutral and an enlightened centrist. He's not. I think he's now drunk the Kool-Aid and he's there. And it's clear he's there. And he's been there for a good few months and some. It's really deeply sad because actually it would be brilliant if he could have Zelensky I'd argue for someone that's got a slightly better grasp of English. Actually, so you've heard Gary Kasparov as well. So here, Gary Kasparov says Rogan is under no obligation to host Zelensky, Klitschko, or anyone else. But after viciously attacking Ukraine with BS talking points, his agenda is clear. If he doesn't allow for equal time, I'll also offer my services if a chess champion isn't too threatening for him. So the good thing about Gary Kasparov is he's Russian, but he's deeply pro-Ukrainian, anti-present Russian regime. And that would be, again, a fascinating. I mean, goodness me, Joe Rogan would have some fascinating discussions to have Gary Kasparov, Volodymyr Zelensky on, and Vitaly Klitschko. Vladimir Klitschko. These would all be great. And Dmitry Kuleba, such great spokesmen, all of them. It's just a real shame that he's not interested, to the point where Jake Bro's now gone, Joe Rogan's just a joke. He's too scared to talk to free men who are fighting to remain free. He'd rather only interview grifters and advocate for genocide and autocracy. So I think Joe Rogan's probably lost some of those more moderate people who appreciate him, and he is just going deeper and deeper into that rabbit hole. But he'll take a lot of people with him. He's an incredibly powerful agent, I think, in the not agent's the wrong word, but entity in the American political scene. Now, I was listening to 3 Democratic strategists who were interviewed on Pod Save America by Dan Pfeiffer the other day, and they were talking about what we thought happened in the campaign, the Harris campaign, what went wrong, what we couldn't do, and the TLDR of it was basically she was never going to win in that time, given this situation, etc., etc. One thing they did say is that she was up for Joe Rogan. So the whole idea that she refused to do Joe Rogan, it just couldn't happen. It ended up the day they wanted it to happen, I think, was the day that Trump went on, and they were saying she was up for anything and everything. There was if we could have got her on all of these shows, we would have got her on these shows. They understood the importance of it. It just unfortunately didn't happen, and that was to the advantage of Trump. Anyway, that's by the by. Right, moving on. Why did I have this tab up? This would have been for some reason. Let's move on. Can't remember. Right, now, fascinating here. So, first, Patrushev, who helped blow up apartment buildings in Russia to get Putin elected, said that Trump owes a debt and needs to repay, while following up that he hoped Trump isn't killed. And now Putin discusses that Trump needs to be careful and not get killed. The Russians are sending a message. Okay, what's going on here? Right. The reference at the beginning here from Olga Lautman is that, I don't know if you remember, but there were apartment blocks that were blown up in Russia, apparently by Chechens, that allowed Putin to start the Chechen war. Or was it the initial Chechen war or the second one? Anyway, this was very clearly a red flag, and there was lots of reasons. Go and look in at the 1999 apartment bombings. In fact, I think it's 1999, isn't it? Apartment bombings, and you'll find all out. Yeah, so 1999 Russian apartment bombings here, that were clearly done by the Russians, like the FSB. You go and look into all the details there. There's a fascinating Wikipedia page, this, by the way. As you can see, it's very long and highly referenced. It's a really, really interesting read. Now, the idea is, well, not the idea, pretty much the fact is that they did that to start the war, and it was them kind of manipulating public thought in Russia against Chechnya. Now, Patrushev now here is saying, I hope that Trump doesn't get killed, and Trump owes a debt and he needs to repay it. So you remember that from a couple of weeks ago, whereas now he's won the election, just he does need to repay that debt. He does owe his winning the election to, it's all a bit cryptic, the idea that possibly the Russians were what got Trump elected. And Putin now discussing here no, that's in Russian. But basically, he said that Trump needs to be careful. He said he's an intelligent guy, but he does need to be careful. These seem to be rather unsubtle threats on Trump's life, right? on the one hand, he's saying, he's an intelligent guy and blah, blah, blah. But on the other hand, I think he needs to be careful. Now, Trump is a very thin-skinned person who is, if the Democrats or pro-Ukrainian or Zelensky want to do anything, it should be to claim that Trump is nothing but a lackey of Putin. If you start doing that, then Trump is going to get peed off because he thinks he's Mr. Number One and the top guy in the world. You play to his narcissistic tendencies and you say, oh, you're just in Putin's pocket. You're Putin's lapdog. That will pee off Trump to the point where he will then try and show Putin to be nothing but an irrelevant speck or whatever. And that's exactly what you want. You want to drive a wedge between Trump and Putin because Trump has been spending too long over the last decade saying really obsequious things to Putin and treating him like he's this amazing strongman. You need him to resent Putin because everyone thinks I'm just your lackey. That's exactly what you want to happen. So sometimes I wonder whether Putin overplays his hand and does things that are really counterproductive. And I think here's an example where if he's kind of making threats to Trump, actually that will give ammunition for people to go, oh, look what Putin's doing now, mate. Are you the strong man here, Trump? What are you going to do to him? What you want is Trump to be forced to take Ukraine's side as opposed to Russia's side. And I think there are elements where that is taking place at the moment. Now, Anton Gerashenko goes on to say Donald Trump has confirmed the appointment of General Keith Kellogg, a U.S. Special Envoy, and I've talked about him a number of times for the Russia-Ukrainian war. Earlier, Kellogg offered Trump his plan to freeze the conflict. His main proposals were Washington will only supply Ukraine with weapons to prevent new Russian attacks, only if Kyiv agrees to peace talks. The United States will warn Moscow if it refuses to negotiate. Washington will increase aid to Kyiv. To push Russia into the talks, the United States and other NATO countries will postpone the question of Ukraine's membership indefinitely in exchange for a comprehensive and verifiable peace deal with security guarantees. So this is the sticking point, I think, for Zelensky, who wants membership in NATO. Ukraine will not be required to give up its intention to return all its territory seized by Russia. However, Kyiv must agree that only diplomatic means will be used to achieve this goal, and that the process may take a long time. So this goes back to although it goes against a previous point, Zelensky wants to join NATO, but on the understanding that he will be able to get back those territories at some point in the future. But Zelensky sees NATO as being, it's point one of the victory plan, wasn't it? So it's like almost a non-negotiable point. So for those who say, no, you can't join NATO, that could be a sticking point that stops Ukraine coming to the table, or at least it will be one of the main bargaining chips. Ukraine will not be required to give up. Next one. In order to get Russia to agree to the deal, the plan proposes to partially lift sanctions imposed on it, but at the same time impose levy on Russian energy exports to finance Ukraine's reconstruction. So an interesting kind of playing around with the idea of sanctions there. The plan also contains a proposal to freeze the front line and introduce a demilitarized zone. This does not mean the plan is final and will be adopted in this form, though. So this is a plan made up some time ago, and it is not the plan. It's just an idea. It could be taken on by Trump. Today, we are at the peak of uncertainty at a bifurcation point, says Gerashenko. Strategic uncertainty is exacerbated by escalation. Today, no one can say what the future will look like, what decisions will be made, and to what extent escalation may reach. Black swans appear, such as the situation in Syria. Uncertainty increases mass anxiety, which provokes panic. So it's important to try and maintain mental stability and the ability to critically analyze the situation. So that's his opinion on Keith Kellogg. I showed you an interview of Keith Kellogg recently it was before he was selected, on Fox News that was made him appear, pretty decent, actually. Keith Kellogg knows his onions with regard to Ukraine. I'm not sure the peace plan is the right peace plan, but it depends how much of that can be played around with. Jake Bro says Trump's pick to be his special envoy and advisor to resolve the war in Ukraine is a brilliant choice. This is retired General Keith Kellogg being asked about Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense. The general knows that Pete Hegseth is not qualified, and he refuses to say on camera that he is qualified. He just gives a fluff non-answer to avoid saying anything bad about Trump's obviously unqualified pick. This is how I know I can trust this guy to deal with the Russians. He's not crazy. So an important point. So he is part of the America First Policy Institute. I think that's what it's called. So he is a full-on kind of MAGA sort of person to a degree, Keith Kellogg, but he's a retired lieutenant general, and he understands military matters and he understands Russia. And he also understands that Pete Hegseth is a bad choice for the Secretary of Defense. Although he's not willing to come out and say, yeah, he's a bad choice, he won't say he's a good choice. And he fluffs that answer, for the right reasons. Anyway, we're going to return to that idea in a second. I think for the first time, says Tim White, Zelensky admits he is willing to give Russian territory for the time being, as long as it's in exchange for NATO membership. It's almost impossible to see NATO unanimously agreeing, though, which is maybe why he said this. Ball is in NATO's court. That could be an interesting bit of statesmanship there, or statecraft or whatever, where he is saying something that will never be agreed upon. So he's happy to say that, yeah, we'll give up territories as long as we get NATO membership, knowing that none of NATO would agree to that because it's a warring nation, and accepting Ukraine into NATO as a warring nation is against the norms. Now, the US is to lift, says Flash News, sanctions on Russia if the peace deal is acceptable to Ukraine. CNN reports details of Trump's special envoy's plan. So I don't know if this is a new variation of the plan, or whether it's just the same plan or whatever. But anyway, CNN reports that in addition to the freezing of the front line and the introduction of the demilitarized zone, Kellogg's plan includes the following points. Russian energy exports will be subject to a special tax, which will be used to rebuild Ukraine. Ukraine should not give up occupied territories, but undertakes to seek their return only through diplomatic means, as we heard earlier. And Kellogg admits that the implementation of the last point will only be possible after Putin is removed from power. Wow, that is massively important. I have long said that Russia will never pull out of Ukraine with Putin still being in power. That's why peace negotiations are problematic, because Putin is existentially linked to the outcome of the war in a way that no one else is. So Zelensky, if Ukraine lose the war, Zelensky would just go and live in another country and he'll do pretty well for himself, right? So he, as a human being, is not existentially linked to the outcome of the war. Putin literally will either, if Russia lose the war, like catastrophically lose the war, Putin will be dead or in prison in a gulag, because there will be a regime change. And he is the ultimate kleptocrat, and he will just go down. No dictator lives out a life of like luxury in retirement, or very few do anyway. Putin will not be one of those. So Putin has to win this war in some way. He has to be seen to win this. So whatever the outcome is, if any negotiations come about, he has to sell it as a win, because otherwise he's on his way out. And that means that the decisions he will make, the rationale for his decisions, will look very different to the rationale of Zelensky. Zelensky is going to be thinking about what is good for the people of Ukraine. Putin is going to be thinking about what is good for me and how do I make this look good on me and for me. And I think that's a really important distinction. Zelensky's sent a signal to Trump about the readiness for negotiations, but the peace process is blocked by the Kremlin, according to Dmytro Kuleba, the former foreign minister, to Sky News. Kuleba explained that Zelensky's statements about diplomatic ways to resolve the conflict and the return of Crimea are aimed at Trump. So there's going to be a lot of playing around with, expectations of who people are and what they might like. So Zelensky is going to be thinking, who is Trump? How do I appeal to Trump in order to get him to make the right decision? So I think there's going to be an awful lot of manipulation going on all the time, which is, welcome to the world of geopolitics. Okay, we now see Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, in Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump. And I think as Trump gets older, his face is looking more and more different. Just, the way he's aging. Anyway, he has gone to, so some people are like, oh, he's gone to Mar-a-Lago, he's kowtowing to Trump. But Trump can't go to Canada. That's the difference. Like Americans, if you're wondering why Prime Minister Justin Trudeau flew to Florida to meet with Donald Trump, it's because Canada doesn't allow convicted felons into the country. Ouch. Anyway, he's gone there. You've got this situation that's developing with Canada and Mexico, where actually it's not. Trump has been trying to sell this as he's getting what he wants, and he keeps saying these things on like Truth Social that hey, the Mexicans have agreeing to do what I've demanded of them due to my rhetorical flourishes about tariffs. And then as soon as he says these things, the Mexican president says, no, that didn't happen. That was a load of BS. Shut up. Anyway, so Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said Trump appeared to lack basic knowledge about current conditions in Mexico. He asked that, they've obviously been in contact. He asked about fentanyl use, which is far lower than in the United States, and expressed concern about the non-existent migrant caravan. Yes, he's an effing moron, says Henry Rosenberg. So, yeah, you've got a potential trade war going on, and you've got the head of Mexico saying, turns out Trump doesn't really know what he's talking about. I shared a video that was fascinating from the Bulwark today about how Trump lied about a Step 1 program, which was to do with black people in incarceration. Actually, Trump did a good thing in his term, in his 2016 to 2020 term, that was really good for that. And Van Jones came out publicly, thanked him for that, and did that in a lot of different places very publicly, and did that right up until like 2023. Trump has consistently come out since like 2018 and said Van Jones had never thanked me for anything, blah, blah, blah. And then he lied about it. Then he was shown that actually that was not true. And then 3 weeks after being shown that was not true and admitting that he'd seen that in this public interview, so, oh, I never knew he'd said that. And he'd said it all the time. So this whole time he'd been lying about Van Jones. He then went into the rallies and then continued his lie and then embellished the lie even further. So the idea is that the man just lies. He just lies. He's a pathological liar. And he's been lying about what he's been saying to Sheinbaum, or what Sheinbaum has agreed. And he's just like, it's so problematic when you can't trust a single word the man says, and he's in the most important position in the world. Anyway, so going back to Hegseth, this guy that has been chosen for the Secretary of Defense, head of Secretary of Defense, who's woefully lacking in experience to do that job. It's a super important job. You're in charge of 3 million people and the biggest budget you can think of, like $900 billion. This is a big job. And you got a guy that's broadly worked for 8 years on as an anchor on Fox News. So new information is coming out. The New York Times has obtained an email in which Pete Hegseth's mother has accused him of routinely abusing women over the years. Quote, this is from his mother. On behalf of all the women, and I know it's many you have abused in some way, I say get some help and take an honest look at yourself. I have no respect for any man that belittles, lies, cheats, sleeps around, and uses women for his own power and ego. You are that man and have been for years. And as your mother, it pains me and embarrasses me to say that, but it is the sad, sad truth. Penelope Hegseth wrote in 2018. Right, stuff like this is coming out. I think so. The question, why am I bringing this up? Because this is the guy that's going to be in charge of the DOD. And therefore has huge importance with regard to what happens with Ukraine. He's not particularly pro-Ukraine, and I think he's looking like he's coming up against more and more obstacles to him getting voted into that position. I would be amazed if he does. I'm hoping there's enough sensible Republican senators who will say no to him getting into that position. What else? Just a short thread here. This is, please don't be fooled for a minute. It's not about Mars. It's not about the moon. It's about satellites. So this is about Elon Musk and satellites. The thing is that the richest man in the world owns the satellites, 3,500 of them. He needs a way to efficiently get them into orbit and potentially bring them back to Earth for repair. Our government is one of the biggest customers for these satellites. I talked about this previously with regard to the Ukraine war and his control of particularly the intermediate satellites in orbit. He has so many of them. There's a fascinating New York Times article on that with loads of interactive infographics on those satellites. And that he's literally not only the richest man in the world and one of the most important men and powerful men on Earth, but actually he controls Twitter, but he actually controls Starlink and communication in so many ways. And he's at the heart of the government, and he's stripping out a regulation, which you can imagine will be stripping out regulation to stop him from doing more of that. And also he'll be able to stop competitors being able to edge in on that. So he's going to become effectively one massive monopoly. So anyway, Secretary Peters Transport Trekkies says the richest man has also built the world's most powerful supercomputer, and he's building another. It's about data processing, rockets, satellites, data processing. Is the picture clearer now? Also, so he's going to potentially. There are theories that he's made sounds that he's going to buy. NBC is spinning out MSNBC and other of their cable channels, and he's said he's going to buy MSNBC, which is a liberal channel, and he's already got Twitter and turned it into like a bit of an echo chamber. If he gets hold of that, and but also he's putting loads of money into one of his AI things that is going to be. It's just anyway. It just looks like he's going to get more and more powerful in all these different spheres. It's not about government efficiency. It's about eliminating government oversight of AI, robotics, and other tech. And it's about shutting down government investigations of shady business practices. Dozens of investigations. So he is being investigated at the moment by FCC, SEC, etc. But now there are pro-Musk, pro-MAGA Trumpites going to be put in those positions. Those investigations will be stopped immediately come January the 20th. And finally, it's not about public buffoonery. It's about hand-waving while the grip tightens around the government. Oh, look over here. Crazy stuff. So anyway, correction, the richest man in the world now has 7,000 satellites and is slated to have 12,000 in the near future. So just be worried. And he's been accusing Alexander Vindman of being a traitor. And there's this whole thing that's bubbling on. He's the Ukrainian background person from a veteran who has come up against Elon Musk. But, you know, who really is a traitor? Had secret communication with Putin, dictator Putin? Is that Elon Musk or Vindman? Oh, it's Musk. Repeatedly publicly promoted Russian propaganda narratives. Is that Musk or Vindman? Oh, no, it's Musk. Proposed that Ukrainians cede occupied territories to Russia. Which one was? Oh, it was Musk again. Posted anti-Ukrainian memes developed by the Russian FSB. Oh, that was Musk too. And promoted ideas that weaken the US defense capabilities. Oh, that's Musk too. So who really is a traitor? I don't think it's Vindman. And it's interesting now, Peter Sweden here saying that breaking news, the European Federation of Journalists, representing 320,000 journalists, have announced they will stop posting on X. If you see hopefully my tab groups will have more and more blue butterflies as I try and find my sources from Blue Sky rather than Musk's Twitter. Hopefully you will join me in that adventure. And so that brings us to the end of today's geopolitics video. I probably need to speak to you guys a bit more directly and drink the rest of my wine and go and see my partner. She's probably lost the plot with my absence. So, Ruff, what do we have? Ruff. I love you. Russia sucks. Blue Sky rocks, and we will win. I love a bit of being concise. That is far more concise than I've ever been. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you for your Swedish love. Really appreciate that, matey. Sarah says, ATP Geopolitics, are you drinking Ukrainian wine now, JP? I bought some today. I am indeed. This is Ukrainian wine. It is Bolgrad Select Collection Duo. It's from Lidl in the UK, and it is a nice little tipple. Very drinkable. I couldn't get the red wine. I prefer red wine, and they didn't have any in, so I'm rather upset about that. My goodness, Julian Roster, who is already an amazing supporter of the channel. Congratulations. My youngest was born on the same day. Oh, yeah. So as I said, Helen's daughter's daughter was born today. I think we are in a pivotal time. Russia could well be on the ropes. It's like fighting the end of level boss level on Street Fighter and stopping to have tea. Schoolboy error. This is a really good point, and thank you so much for your insane kindness there, Julian. That's just too kind. I get this sense that that Russia are on the ropes, and I'm often wondering, as I'm sure you guys do as well, whether how much of this is hopium, how much is this me trying to wishful think my way through the days. But then you look at all these data points, you're like, the amount of people they're losing, the fact that they're driving motorcycles and electric scooters into contact lines, and the fact that this is happening, and the fact that that's happening, and all these anecdotes here and this data here, they have to be in trouble. But they just have an amazing capability of stringing it out longer. So they're on the ropes, but they never quite fall to their knees. And it's how long are they able to stay on the ropes? Because the longer they stay on the ropes, the weaker Ukraine get as well. And that's where we're at. And we keep wishing that they will just fall to their knees. And I guess what Julian here is saying is that, you know, stopping to have a tea when they're on the ropes rather than landing that killer punch means that they will either re-energize or just remain on the ropes, and Ukraine will continue to degrade. The US post January the 20th need to come in and just keep pummeling Russia. Like, people are really critical of the Biden regime, but the reality of what the Biden regime has done, and I guess history will be able to evaluate this more effectively. And this is a kind of theory that Lloyd Austin did this on purpose, that he said it back in April 2022, that we need to, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like, we need to stop Russia being able to do this again in the near future at all. In other words, we need to degrade Russia in such a fundamental way that they can't get back on their feet quickly and do this again. And the best way of doing that is actually have a really long protracted war where they get freaking degraded so massively in so many ways. Like, demographically, they lose that many people that this is a generational issue. They lose that many pieces of kit that they're pulling out M46 artillery pieces from deep stock. They're losing that many pieces of kit that they're putting like submarine rocket launchers on freaking MTLBs, right? That is the what happens when you don't have a quick war. So people will criticize Biden for not giving Ukraine enough stuff quickly enough. And yeah, I'll be one of those people as well. But the flip side of that is the drip feeding has actually meant that Russia has been degraded far more fundamentally and chronically. And if Trump comes in now and does the right thing, Russia will not only be on the ropes, but if they are pummeled to the floor, they won't be able to get up again for a very, very long time. And that would have been facilitated by the slow feed of weapons to Ukraine by the Biden administration. Now, some people say almost conspiratorially that was done on purpose. I don't think so. I think anti-escalation was what was driving the Biden administration, and they just made the wrong calculations on that. But you can understand why they did that. It's a very dangerous thing to mess around with nuclear calculations. But I think they made the wrong calculations. But I think Russia will be far more fundamentally degraded as a result. Now, the cost of that degradation of Russia on that long-term basis, Ukrainian lives, it's the Ukrainian economy, it's Ukraine's future. So there could an alternate sliding doors reality. We're never going to know, but there could be this situation where the US supplied Ukraine with everything. Russia was still too afraid to use nukes. Ukraine won the war far more quickly, but then 10 years later, Russia were able to get back, or 5 years later, they're able to get back on their feet and take a second bite of the apple and be more prepared for it. They weren't prepared for this war because they thought it was going to be a special military operation that would be just flipping over the government in 3 days. That didn't happen. Next time they tried it, it could have been more successful militarily. So there are all sorts of counterfactuals and what ifs that can mess around with our understanding, and we may never know. But on the one hand, you can argue that the slow feed of the weapons to Ukraine has actually more successfully destroyed Russia, but at the cost of the Ukrainians. Like, you are swapping Russian chronic degradation for Ukrainian lives and the Ukrainian economy and the Ukrainian energy grid. Is that a fair swap? I have no way of answering that. But let me know what you think, whether I'm completely off there. If the Russian economy collapses, how will this impact the Russians fighting at the front? Well, of course, no one's going to be getting paid. I mean, at the moment, they're putting all their money into that, into paying rather than other things. But I just think you will start getting families not being able to afford things, and I don't know. I just think the whole malaise will sweep across the Russian economy and the Russian society. They will struggle to get, or maybe actually that means the only way of getting decent money is joining the army. But I just think it will be, I don't know. I can just see Russia collapsing, and the at the end of the day, the people in the police forces and the thugs, the people that are facilitating the Russian regime, they have families as well, and they have to buy groceries as well. And so I wonder about this with Georgia, the people who are beating up their fellow Georgians. That some of these people they'll know. This is a small country, Georgia. There'll be people who know. You've got cousins in the Georgian police, riot police. You'd be like on Facebook, "Why are you doing that, mate?" You know. So I wonder about these dynamics that go on in those kind of situations. But with I don't know. I don't know enough about regime collapses, but I'd imagine that there'll be many effects of a Russian economic collapse. You'll have elites wanting to change things and wanting a new regime in place. You might even have the whole setup of the military elites as well, and the political elites, and no one is good. I don't think anyone in their right mind could look at Russia right now and say Putin made the right choice. I reckon if you went and spoke privately to and said, right, this conversation never get out anywhere, but spoke to every single Russian politician and top brass military person and said, and asked, do you think Putin made the right decision? Look at everything now. Was it a good decision to invade Ukraine? Would you rather go back 10 years in time and have life as it was in maybe 2012 before Crimea was invaded? Was Russia doing better than it is now? Was that a better time? Would you prefer that none of this happened? I reckon most people would don't tell anyone, but yeah, no, I think this has been stupid. So I think collapse can, I don't know how it would affect people fighting in the front. There's so many variables, but I just think the whole war effort will just crumble if there was a proper economic collapse. Dawn Fox says, if Russia runs out of money and stops paying its troops, they'll all pack up and go home. Then Ukraine can just walk back into their occupied territories. This is why I keep saying that Ukraine's success is contingent upon several things. One of them has to be the economic collapse of Russia. That will be how Ukraine gets back 1991 borders. We talk about that spectrum, and if for Ukraine to get further down this end of the spectrum, they will need the collapse of Russia to take place. And if you're going to get Crimea back, it would have to be with a regime change due to an economic collapse. I'm fairly sure of that, but that's just my intuition, though. I'm just fairly sure of my intuitions. Camilla Matson, thank you for your Swedish support there, says maybe propaganda from Zelensky, I hope. I'm not quite sure what you're trying to say there, but I don't know if you're talking about Zelensky trying to influence people like Trump and playing that, not the propaganda game, but the influence game with Trump. I'm not quite sure where you're going with that, but thank you for your support. We have a few more comments to go through. Why watch 30 seconds of ranting when you can watch 30 minutes? I haven't ranted that much, have I? General consensus says Russia is far too weak to actually attack NATO and the US. I agree. This is not a world war. I disagree. China and Russia only attack weak nations. Russia is losing to Ukraine. They can't even take the Donbass. I agree with that, but I think this is a world war for all the reasons I've given previously. The amount of functionally, we're doing everything that you would do in any kind of war as allies of Ukraine without sending our troops to the front line. We've got special forces there. We're providing weapons. We're providing finances. We're doing economic war. We're doing trade war. We're doing political war. We're doing information war. We're doing cyber war. All of that is happening with all of the nations supporting Ukraine, and with Russia and with Iran and with you can argue Georgia's well involved, Romania, all of these places, but obviously Ukraine with the conventional war, to whom we are providing all those weapons from our own resources. But then you've got Iran, China, North Korea, and then you've got other nations loosely affiliated. And I just think it's a whole global shebang that is defined in my books as a world war, or defines the situation as being a world war. Benny Pike, shorts bring JP's content to a different audience. There's some crossover, but a lot of people only watch shorts. Interesting, and he's a guy that knows, because he doesn't. He's a legend. Finnish guy, member for 9 months, so still here. Slava Ukraine, Russia delenda est. Thank you, Finnish guy, for being still there. Johnny Nedregard says, why is Turkey the only country defending NATO air? I don't know what you mean by that. So NATO air, Turkey, where would that be? Yeah, I don't know what you mean. They did shoot down a Russian jet, didn't they? A couple of years back. But I don't know quite what you mean there, Johnny. But thank you for your support there. A few more. So Rob C, how well do you think EU ROW sanctions will do against Russia without the US? Could we end up having secondary sanctions against the US for trading with Russia? I've thought about this actually, and I'd rather that the US did not pull sanctions from across the board on Russia. From Russia across the board. I do worry about that. I think the EU sanctions will be a shadow of what the US sanctions are, and we would really struggle to have the effect. And then what happens is, so this is a bit like you get to a critical mass. Sanctions need everyone to do it. If everyone does sanctions, then you get completely screwed as a country that's being sanctioned, and also everyone's on the same kind of level playing field because you're all sanctioning that country. But if you get almost like free riders, if you get certain people that aren't adhering to that sanction, then actually they do really well out of it. So India, for example, we're not sanctioning you, and because you're so desperate because you're getting screwed over by these sanctions that all these countries are putting on you, we can then get you to give us the best deal on hydrocarbons, on this and that, right? The fewer countries that do the sanctions, the more the countries that do the sanctions get punished themselves, because then things become more expensive. So it's like, hang on, India getting cheaper hydrocarbons than anyone in Europe because they're not sanctioning Russia, and so therefore they can make their goods more cheaply, and then they can sell their goods on a global market, and we are competing against them, but we can't do it as cheaply because we can't get those cheap hydrocarbons precisely because we're sanctioning Russia. And so our widgets that we're selling are more expensive than Indian widgets, so the Indian widget is going to sell better, which means that they are rewarded for not sanctioning. And there's a problem. So if you get to a situation where the US stops sanctioning and the EU is left on its own to sanction, then those 27 countries, and maybe UK and maybe a few others, are going to be the minority, and they will be trying to carry out these sanctions, but it'll end up punishing those countries themselves, which is kind of the argument that that Orban makes for Hungary. Why are we doing these sanctions? They're only costing us more. Sanctions are fine that if loads of people do them, the fewer people that do them, it will end up punishing you. So they won't be nearly as effective on Russia, and B, they'll end up punishing the EU even more. Is my opinion. Great question there, though, Rob. Sarah says UK has put sanctions against the Shadow Fleet. Can you comment on that? Yeah, brilliant. We've put loads of sanctions on the Shadow Fleet, and it's probably like a game of whack-a-mole. And I don't know the finer details, but the UK is pretty important in maritime matters because we have a near monopoly on maritime insurance through like Lloyd's of London and other London-based historical insurers, and that's how we were able to get the oil price cap down below $60 a barrel originally, and they had all these loopholes. So the case was, so we said, right, because the UK has this near monopoly, we are going to force our insurers to say, you are not going to insure any vessel that is carrying oil and is going to sell that oil for over $60 a barrel. You will not get insurance. And that near monopoly meant that you couldn't then transport Russian oil because you wouldn't be insured, which means if you have an accident, then you're not going to be insured for that. But also you won't be able to dock in any port because you need insurance to dock in ports, etc., etc. So what then Russia did was say, okay, we're going to just have a bunch of ships that are ghost fleet that, you know, will turn off the transponders, and it's kind of illegal, and, you know, you don't know who owns it, and then we're going to have Russian oil here, and it'll be in the middle of the sea, be put onto this ship, and then that, and no one knows quite what's going on, and it's all a bit dodgy. And the way I understand it is that we've then gone and sanctioned these individual ships. You're right, we know that's a ghost fleet ship, and that blah blah blah, and we're going to sanction that ship directly, that one, and the people that own these ships. And it is going down to the more micro level, as rather than putting on a kind of a rule for everyone. So we've got this rule for everyone, but you're all breaking these rules. So we now have to go and hit each of you individually as ships. And then they've sanctioned 50 ships individually. And it just makes it more difficult for these ships to do business around the world and to dock in these ports and et cetera, et cetera. And hopefully that has an effect. I don't know how effective sanctioning these individual ships will be, though. I don't know enough about that kind of stuff. I probably don't know enough about what I've just been saying, and I'm probably incorrect, so correct me if I'm wrong. Orion Starfire says, I hate that my country has so much leverage on the world stage when the people voting don't bother to try and understand what the world stage looks like. As an American, thank you, Jonathan. I couldn't agree with you more, and I'd actually multiply that across most countries on Earth. I think we are deeply politically ignorant generally. And you've got to work really hard to try and get knowledgeable. And does it make us happier people? No, not necessarily. Is ignorance bliss? Possibly. You got lots of people very happy with their lives, going down a pub on a Friday night, just only thinking about a game of darts and whether football teams won, and happy days. And then you go to a voting booth and like, yeah, I don't really care about this. And you vote, I don't like this or I don't like that, but actually I don't have an informed opinion on this. And then you vote as a low information voter, and you are unjustified in the vote, I think, that you make largely. How do you break that? I don't know. There are lots of things you could do. I think Australia has an interesting idea where, I think, if I'm correct in thinking, the first election, like after you turn 18, you have to vote in, which means that you generally will try and get a bit more clued up about politics because you're forced to vote, or you get fined. And I actually quite like that idea because it forces you. I mean, either you go and just vote anyway, but I think it's more likely to make you go, oh, I might as well find out what this is all about then. And then, but I think education, I think we should have politics as a mandatory subject in all schools in all countries. I didn't really properly understand politics till I was over 30. Not really. And I look back now and think, oh my God, I was so bloody ignorant. And there I was voting without really knowing properly what I was voting for, really understand the left right spectrum, even though that's not even very accurate anyway, a very good metric or very good framework, until much later in life. And I'm like, seriously? So there's so many people are voting without the requisite knowledge. And yeah, we just need to do a better job of educating our youth. And we are going to have to fight against echo chambers and information echo chambers and the death of mainstream media, potentially, which you might think is a good thing, but I think it's a deeply worrying thing, because as soon as people aren't getting their news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and places like that, and yeah, there are problems with a lot of those places, but take in the UK something like BBC News, which is far more centrist. I know lots of people will slag off the BBC for being lefty, but it's not. It's politically quite vacuous and sits in the centre and does broad reporting, but without giving political opinion. You go and check out Fox News or MSNBC, they'll give you their political opinion. BBC won't. Don't look at the BBC and say, oh, I've seen that program over there and they've got a bunch of black people or gay people on, therefore they're left wing and it's all woke. That's your cultural programming. If you go and look at the political programming in the BBC, it is either deeply centrist and quite vacuous, or it is actually slightly right of center, because if you look at all of their political editors over the last 15 years, they have been like Nick Robinson, John Humphreys. All these people are like pretty right-wing people. Nick Robinson is the political editor. Laura Kunsberg. Nick Robinson was the head of the student conservative party at Cambridge University or whatever. So, but what the BBC did when we all watched the news, or more of us watched the news on mainstream media, we were being fed some kind of knowledge that was at least somewhat balanced about the different parties. If we eschew mainstream media and start going to what will eventually be algorithmically decided echo chambers, then we spiral into the extremes, and then we are just fed what the algorithm feeds us, and we do not. So we might think we're politically educated, but actually we're politically ideologically brainwashed to one particular side or another, and we're all victims to this. But I do worry that when you start losing mainstream media, you replace it with something far more problematic. All the worries we have about mainstream media, you can multiply by tenfold by what the alternative will be. And we will need, as society and as a globe, we will need to be doing things very seriously about disinformation and misinformation, and about echo chambers, and about where we get our information, and how we can be manipulated by algorithms and the people who control those algorithms. Not mentioning anyone, Elon Musk. Hopefully that answers something of your question there. Niels Clement, thank you so much for your 10 ATP Geopolitics memberships. We're getting there. We're almost at the end. I promise you guys. Vigo, good to see you here, mate. Have you got time and energy to dissect and philosophize on Snyder's On Freedom? I have not read it yet. I've read On Tyranny, and it is an absolute must read, but I must listen to or read Timothy Snyder's On Freedom. So thank you for reminding me that. I'm at the moment reading Autocracy Inc. by Anne Applebaum, and I have another book just after that, and then I'll get onto Schneider. Right, Taryn Makiage, sorry if I butchered that. Thank you. Joe Rogan saw all those YouTubers getting paid off and asked how I get some of that sweet Kremlin money. Some people are saying that, actually. I don't know how serious that is, but some people are saying that. Thank you, Taryn. JR, Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 show Russians are not to be trusted. That's a whole kettle of fish. That's a whole can of worms. Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, these agreements for peace post 2014, where Ukraine were kind of forced to do a peace deal that wasn't good for Ukraine. But actually, any treaty Russia's ever done, Russia are not to be trusted in any agreement they've ever had. I mean, you've only got to look at form there. It is, yeah. Just don't trust Russia. Taryn, again, NATO is rather toothless when it comes to hybrid warfare attacks. Do you think NATO membership will be enough to protect Russia from hybrid warfare, Ukraine from hybrid warfare, and election interference from Russia? That's a great question. I haven't got enough time to answer that properly, but I think there's a lot of talk about this right now, which is what is enough to trigger Article 5. This is the conversations happening out there with analysts and politicians, and there are certain people in NATO saying actually that kind of cyber warfare attack from Russia, that should be triggering Article 5. What is the trigger point? Well, I discussed this on a video the other day, where there are two components of this, in my opinion. One is the severity of the cyber warfare thing, as in, how severe was that event, and will that trigger Article 5? And then there is like the kind of the notion of cyber warfare at all, just in general. Like, what is the trigger point for Article 5 for like that is war in terms of cyber warfare or information warfare, all these other kinds of hybrid warfare. And I don't think there is no objective answer to that. And as a result, it's not very clear, and as a result, people shy away from actually making big, bold proclamations on that. And as a result of that, Russia gets away with pushing the envelope, and no one reacts to it because, like, oh, there is no definable, very clear red line there. No one's set out a red line, and so therefore Russia just keep doing this, and we go, oh, that's nasty, and it's probably Russia, but there's plausible deniability. And then it happens again, it happens again, it happens again. At some point, like, there must be a straw that breaks a camel's back, and at some point, NATO is going to go, that's freaking war. People don't want to do that because obviously that means war, right? And that means NATO will be at war with Russia. That's a great power for Russia. Russia has immense power with being able to do that and know that no NATO nation is going to want to say, that's Article 5, that cyber attack on that hospital, that's an act of war on our country, and we are a member of NATO, and that's triggered Article 5. We all now need to go to war with Russia. No one wants to do that because that's going to cost a lot of money and a lot of deaths. And so they go, it's probably Russia. And then they wait to do it again and again. And Russia know that, and they can keep doing it. They can call the bluff on and on. Cheryl says, we aren't safe from hybrid warfare and election interference. Nobody is. True that, Cheryl. True. Michael Vucha, the trade war is inevitable. This came out from JT's visit to the golf course. I haven't read about Justin Trudeau visiting the golf course yet, so I'll have to look into that. Benny Pie says, Russian people don't protest about their dead. I doubt they will protest about the economy until it really is dire. And most of the people who are ready to protest, Benny, as you know, have left Russia already, and you've only got the most pliant, malleable members of the Russian society left. Yes, so that I will move on. Bad Boys Club podcast. Thank you for your super sticker. Turkey shot down a Russian plane a long time ago. Yeah. But I didn't know whether that's what it's referring to and in what context. But yeah, there was that issue with shooting down a Russian plane near. It kind of flew. Was it around Syria and flew over Turkish airspace, and they shot it down. Thank you, Mr. Staub. Congrats on the new addition to the family, JP. Thank you, matey. Really appreciate that. And the final one, you'll be happy to know, because most of you lost the will to live. JPH says, should Europe stop ships using the Baltic Sea going to and from Russia due to all the cables being cut? Yes. I think we need to be stronger and say, we think you've done that. We can either say that's an invocation of Article 5, in which case we're at war with you, or if we're not happy to do that, you ain't going to have any ships coming through here, and we are going to stop them from happening. Or we're going to be investigating every ship that comes through and inspecting them all, or something like that. Yes, I think we need to be hardcore on Russia. Russia don't have any problems being harsh with anyone else. We need to be harsh on Russia. We need to be the ones applying red lines to Russia, and we just are too afraid to do that. Anyway, I haven't read all of these amazing comments, no doubt amazing comments, all throughout tonight, and there are so many of them. All I can say is thank you so much to JR, who has been sifting through these comments and allowing me to just read the ones that are most pertinent to the discussions at hand. Hopefully, there's been a narrative that's gone through this video. It's been a super long one, as it always is with me. Take care, everybody. Really appreciate your support. And thank you so much to the incredible, incredible generosity of the people in the live chats. Julian Roster, particularly, such an amazing supporter, and Mark Bisque, Tim Vermogen, and others. Really, really incredibly honoured to have you guys here as part of the team. And it has been a lot to go through, and that's why this became a live, because otherwise that would have been a 2-hour pre-record and no one would have watched that. Let's face it. But anyway, really appreciate the mods. Really appreciate you guys. And thanks also for your kind words for the new addition to the family, for those Kiwis to the far now, as I'd say if I was speaking Maori. Take care, y'all. Speak to you soon. Big love.